You know what's strange right now as you're watching this? You might be completely healed from something that once destroyed you, and you don't even realize it. Think about that for a second. You could be sitting there thinking you're still broken, still damaged, still struggling with the same old wounds. Meanwhile, your psyche has been quietly doing the work, silently, invisibly, rebuilding you from the inside out while you weren't paying attention. Carl Jung understood something most therapists miss. He knew that healing doesn't announce itself with trumpets and confetti. It doesn't send you a notification saying, "Congratulations, you're fixed now." No. Real healing is subtle. It's the psychological equivalent of a tree growing. You don't see it happening, but one day you look up and realize, holy shit, when did I become this tall? Here's what I'm going to prove to you. In the next 50 minutes, you've healed more than you think. And I'm going to show you exactly how to recognize it. But here's the catch. This isn't one of those feel-good videos that tells you everything is fine when it's not. This is about something deeper, something Jung spent his entire life studying. The process he called individuation, the journey from fragmentation to wholeness, from psychological chaos to integration. And if you stick with me, I'm going to walk you through 7 unmistakable signs that this process has been happening inside you. 7 markers that prove your psyche has been healing even when your mind thought it was still broken. Because here's the truth, nobody tells you. Your consciousness is always the last one to know. Before we dive deeper, if this resonates with your soul's journey, please hit that like button and subscribe for more transformational content. Your support helps this message reach other souls who need to hear it. Let's start with what's wrong. What we get completely backwards about this whole thing. Most people think healing is linear. You're broken, you do the work, you get better. A straight line from point A to point B. Damage to recovery, wound to scar. But that's not how the psyche works. Jung knew this. He understood that the human mind isn't a machine you can fix with the right tools. It's more like an ecosystem, complex, layered, full of hidden processes happening beneath the surface. You ever notice how you can't remember exactly when you stopped being afraid of something? Like you were terrified of public speaking for years, and then one day someone asks you to give a presentation and you just do it. Without the usual panic. Without the 3-day anxiety spiral beforehand. When did that change? You can't pinpoint it. It just happened. That's what real healing looks like. It's not dramatic. It's not a moment where angels descend and you suddenly feel whole. It's quieter than that, sneakier. And here's why this matters. If you don't know what healing actually looks like, you'll miss it when it happens to you. You'll keep thinking you're broken long after you've already mended. You'll keep searching for a transformation that already occurred. I see this all the time. People who've done years of therapy, years of inner work, years of sitting with their pain and integrating their shadows. And they still describe themselves as working on it, or still healing, or not there yet. Meanwhile, if you look at their actual life, their actual behavior, their actual relationships, they're completely different people from who they were 5 years ago. The evidence of healing is everywhere. But they can't see it because they're looking for the wrong signs. So that's what we're going to fix today. I'm going to give you a framework, a way of recognizing the markers of deep psychological healing based on Carl Jung's understanding of how the psyche actually transforms. Not how we think it should transform, how it actually does. And I promise you, by the end of this, you're going to see yourself differently. You're going to recognize healing you didn't know had happened. You're going to give yourself credit for growth you've been denying. But first, we need to understand what Jung meant by healing in the first place. Here's where Jung broke from everyone else. Here's where he became dangerous. Most therapeutic approaches, most self-help philosophies, Most spiritual traditions, they all have the same underlying assumption. Healing means becoming better, becoming good, becoming the idealized version of yourself. Get rid of your anger, eliminate your selfishness, transcend your pettiness, become pure, become enlightened, become the best version of you. Jung said, that's not healing. That's repression with a spiritual mask. Because here's what happens when you try to become good. When you try to eliminate all the parts of yourself you judge as bad or wrong or unacceptable, you don't get rid of them. You just push them into what Jung called the shadow, the unconscious realm where all your rejected parts go to live. And the shadow doesn't just sit there quietly. It grows. It gains power. It becomes, in Jung's words, blacker and denser the more you ignore it. Think about the most judgmental people you know, the ones constantly criticizing others, the ones who seem obsessed with other people's moral failures. What are they really doing? They're projecting their own shadow. They're seeing in others what they can't acknowledge in themselves. The angry person who rails against aggression, the sexually repressed person who's obsessed with other people's sex lives, the greedy person who constantly accuses others of being materialistic. That's the shadow at work. So Jung proposed something radical. He said, you don't heal by becoming good. You heal by becoming whole, by integrating everything, light and dark, good and bad, angel and demon. He wrote, I'd rather be whole than good. Let that sink in for a second. He'd rather be whole than good. That's not permission to be an asshole. It's not a justification for hurting people. It's something deeper. It's the recognition that every human psyche contains contradictions, contains darkness, contains impulses and desires and qualities we've been taught to reject. And true healing, true psychological health comes from acknowledging all of it, befriending all of it, integrating all of it into conscious awareness. This is what he called individuation, the process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you think you should be. Now, this process doesn't happen overnight. It's not something you complete and check off your list. It's a lifelong journey, but there are markers along the way, signs that indicate you're moving in the right direction, that the work is happening. And that's what these 7 signs are. They're not achievements. They're not goals to pursue. They're natural byproducts of the individuation process. Evidence that your psyche is doing its work. So let's get into them. Sign number 1, the gift of solitude. Here's the first sign you've healed more than you realize. You can be alone without being lonely. Now, I know that sounds simple, maybe even obvious, but pay attention to what's actually happening here, because this is profound. Most people are terrified of being alone, and I don't mean for an hour or two. I mean really alone. No phone, no distractions, no TV, no music, just you and your thoughts in a quiet room. Try it sometime. Watch what happens. 5 minutes in your hand reaches for your phone without you even consciously deciding to. Your mind starts listing all the things you need to do. You suddenly remember emails you need to send, texts you need to answer, videos you need to watch. Anything to avoid being present with yourself. Jung understood this. He said we fill our lives with noise and activity specifically to avoid confronting what's inside. Because what's inside can be terrifying. All those thoughts we don't want to think, all those feelings we don't want to feel, all those parts of ourselves we've been running from. But here's what changes when you've started to heal. You can sit with yourself. You can be in that quiet room and feel okay. Not ecstatic, not necessarily happy, just okay. Peaceful, even content. Why? Because you've done something most people never do. You've met yourself, the real you, not the persona you present to the world, not the idealized version you wish you were. The actual you with all your flaws and fears and weird thoughts and uncomfortable truths. This is shadow work. This is what Jung meant by making the unconscious conscious. You've looked at the parts of yourself you were taught to hide. The anger, the jealousy, the pettiness, the desire for revenge, the sexual thoughts you're supposed to suppress, the selfish impulses you're supposed to deny. And instead of running from them, you acknowledge them. You said, okay, this is also me. That's integration. That's how the shadow loses its power over you. Because here's the thing about the parts of yourself you reject. They don't go away. They just go underground. They become what Jung called autonomous complexes. Mini personalities within your psyche that hijack your behavior when you're not looking. Ever blow up at someone over something small and then think, why did I react like that? That's not even like me. That's a complex activating. That's your shadow taking control. But when you've integrated these parts, when you've brought them into consciousness and accepted them as aspects of who you are, they stop controlling you. They become just parts of you. Not good, not bad, just human. And that's when solitude becomes possible. Because you're no longer afraid of what you'll find when you're alone with yourself. You've already met those demons. You've already shaken hands with them. They're not strangers anymore. You become your own companion, your own friend, and that's one of the most underrated signs of deep psychological healing. If you can sit in a quiet room with yourself for an hour and feel at peace, you've healed more than you realize. Sign number 2, when the past loses its teeth. Second sign your old triggers don't trigger you anymore. Let me paint you a picture. There's this thing that used to absolutely wreck you. Maybe it was a certain tone of voice, maybe it was being criticized, maybe it was feeling ignored or overlooked, maybe it was seeing someone succeed where you failed. Whatever it was when it happened, boom, you'd spiral. Hours, days, sometimes weeks of emotional chaos. Rumination, self-doubt, anger. That sick feeling in your stomach that wouldn't go away. It had power over you, complete power. But then something changes, and you don't even notice it at first. That same situation happens. That same trigger presents itself, and you feel something. A little twinge maybe. A brief moment of discomfort, but it doesn't consume you. It doesn't pull you under. You notice it. You observe it. You think, interesting. And then you move on. What the hell happened, Jung would say you made the unconscious conscious. You brought the buried wound into the light and processed it, integrated it, metabolized it. See, triggers are basically psychic landmines. They're buried remnants of unprocessed pain, traumatic or painful experiences that got shoved into the unconscious because they were too overwhelming to deal with at the time. And they stay there hidden until something in your present-day life reminds your psyche of that original wound. Then boom, the mind explodes. You're not responding to what's actually happening now. You're responding to what happened then. This is why our reactions sometimes feel disproportionate to the situation. Your partner forgets to text you back and you feel this massive wave of abandonment. Your boss gives you feedback and you feel like you're being attacked. Someone disagrees with you and you feel like your entire identity is under threat. The present moment triggered a past wound. And the emotional intensity you're feeling, that's from the past, not the present. But here's what's beautiful about healing. As you do the work, as you examine these wounds, as you understand their origins and feel the feelings you suppressed, something shifts. The landmines get defused. The old wounds still exist. Healing doesn't erase your history, but they've been integrated. They've been brought from the unconscious into consciousness. They've become part of your story rather than unconscious forces controlling your story. You can look at them now. You can say, "Oh yeah, that's why I reacted that way. That reminds me of when I was 8 and my dad did this." Or, "That touches the same place as when my ex said that." You see the connection. You understand the pattern. And in that understanding, in that consciousness, the trigger loses most of its power. It's like the difference between being haunted by a ghost and understanding the history of a house. Same facts, completely different emotional experience. This is huge. This is one of the clearest signs that deep healing has occurred. And a lot of people miss it because they're not paying attention. You stop reacting the way you used to, and instead of celebrating that growth, you barely notice it. It just feels normal. Like, of course, I'm not devastated by criticism anymore. I'm an adult. But no, that took work. That took healing. That took your psyche doing thousands of hours of background processing to integrate that wound. Give yourself credit for that. Recognize it as the marker of healing that it is. Because when the past loses its teeth, when your triggers stop triggering you, that's not numbness. That's not denial. That's integration. That's wholeness. Sign number 3. The paradox playground. Third sign, and this is where it gets interesting. You can hold contradictions without losing your mind. Let me ask you something. Can you love someone and also be frustrated by them? Can you be grateful for your life while also acknowledging its difficulties? Can you be confident in your abilities while also recognizing your limitations? If you answered yes, congratulations. You've achieved something most people struggle with their entire lives. You can hold paradox. Western culture hates paradox. We want things to be one way or the other, right or wrong, good or bad, success or failure. You're either confident or insecure, either happy or sad, either healed or broken. We're taught that contradictions need to be resolved, that you need to pick a side, that you need to be consistent. But life doesn't work that way, and the psyche definitely doesn't work that way. Jung knew this. He talked about what he called the transcendent function, the ability to hold opposing truths simultaneously without collapsing them into a single answer. This is psychological maturity. This is what integration actually looks like. Think about it. You contain multitudes. You're not one thing. You're kind and selfish. You're brave and afraid. You're wise and foolish. You love and you hate. You're strong and vulnerable. You're confident and uncertain. All of these exist in you at the same time. And when you've healed significantly, you can acknowledge this without it breaking your brain. You don't need to resolve the contradiction. You don't need to be one thing. You don't need the world to make simple binary sense. This connects directly to what we talked about earlier with the shadow. Because the shadow is basically everything you've rejected, because it contradicts your ego's idea of who you are. You want to see yourself as a good person, so you reject your selfishness. You want to see yourself as strong, so you reject your vulnerability. You want to see yourself as rational, so you reject your emotions. But healing means bringing these rejected parts back into consciousness, admitting they exist, acknowledging that you're complex, contradictory, human. And here's what's wild. When you can do this, when you can hold paradox, you become more authentic, not less. Because you're not pretending anymore. You're not maintaining this exhausting facade of consistency. You're just being who you actually are, which includes contradictions. You can admit, yeah, I love my job, and I also resent it sometimes. Both true. I'm grateful for my partner, and I also get annoyed by them. Both true. I'm proud of my accomplishments, and I also feel like I haven't done enough. Both true. The need to pick one side to be consistent, to always have the right answer, these rigid requirements start to soften. And this is liberating. It's like your psyche takes a deep breath and says, "Oh, thank God I don't have to pretend anymore." This relates to what scholars of Carl Rogers and personal development often discuss about congruence and authenticity. While Rogers approached it from a different angle than Jung, both understood that psychological health involves integrating all aspects of the self, rather than rejecting parts that don't fit an ideal self-concept. Jung called this the union of opposites. It's the recognition that transformation happens not by eliminating one side of a polarity, but by holding both in creative tension, light and dark, strength and weakness, joy and sorrow, success and failure. You need both. You are both. And when you can accept that, when you can live in that tension without needing to resolve it, you've achieved something profound. If you find yourself able to hold contradictions that used to tear you apart, that's a sign. That's evidence of deep healing. That's your psyche telling you that you've integrated more than you realize. Sign number 4, projection immunity, 4th sign. Other people's projections don't stick to you anymore. This one's subtle but powerful. So let's break it down. First, what's projection? In Jungian psychology, projection is when you see in others what you can't see in yourself. When you haven't integrated a part of your own psyche, you project it outward. You see it in other people, and then you react strongly to what you see. The person who's terrified of their own anger sees everyone else as aggressive. The person who can't acknowledge their own neediness sees everyone else as clingy. The person who's running from their own sadness sees everyone else as depressed and tries to fix them. You're not seeing the other person clearly. You're seeing your own shadow reflected back at you. But here's the thing, projection works both ways. Other people are constantly projecting onto you too. They're seeing in you qualities that belong to their psyche, not yours. They're expecting you to play roles that come from their history, not your reality. They're attributing to you motivations, feelings, and characteristics that are actually their own unconscious material. And when you haven't healed, when you haven't differentiated your own psyche enough, you absorb these projections. You take them as truth about yourself. Someone treats you like an authority figure, even though you're peers, you start acting like an authority figure. Someone expects you to be weak or needy. You start feeling weak and needy. Someone projects their anger onto you. You start questioning if you're actually an angry person. You become what others project onto you because you don't have a strong enough sense of who you actually are. But here's what changes with healing. You develop what I call projection immunity. Not complete imperviousness, you're still human, but a sturdy capacity to recognize when someone is projecting onto you rather than seeing you clearly. Let me give you an example. Say you're in a meeting and someone gets defensive when you ask a simple question. They respond as if you've attacked them, as if you have some hidden agenda. In the past, you might have absorbed that. You might have thought, "Oh my God, was I aggressive? Did I say it wrong? Am I being hostile?" without realizing it. You take on their projection and start questioning yourself. But when you've healed, when you know yourself better, you can recognize it for what it is. You can think, interesting. That's their interpretation, not my intention. They're responding to something in their own psyche, not to what I actually said. You can have compassion for their reaction without taking responsibility for their projection. This is huge. This is what creates healthy boundaries. Because boundaries aren't about building walls or keeping people out. Boundaries are about knowing where you end and another person begins. What's yours and what's theirs. When you can distinguish between accurate feedback and projection, between what truly belongs to you and what someone else is trying to place on you, you've achieved clarity most people never reach. You know yourself well enough to say, "Nope, that's not mine," when someone tries to hand you their shadow. And this doesn't make you callous or disconnected. You can still have empathy. You can still be open to feedback. But you're not a sponge anymore. You're not absorbing everyone's unconscious material and carrying it around like it's yours. You've differentiated. You've individuated enough to know yourself distinctly from others. If you find yourself less affected by other people's judgments, less likely to absorb their projections, less inclined to shape yourself according to their expectations, that's not coldness. That's not arrogance. That's healing. That's you knowing yourself well enough to distinguish between what's real and what's projected. Sign number 5, the dream shift. 5th sign, your dreams have changed. Now, some of you might be thinking, I don't remember my dreams, or I don't pay attention to dreams. And that's fine. This sign might not apply to you specifically, but for those who do engage with their dream life, this is one of the most telling markers of deep psychological transformation. Jung viewed dreams as direct communications from the unconscious, messages from the parts of yourself that don't speak in words or logic. The dream world reveals the current state of your psyche, what's happening beneath conscious awareness. And when you're in states of significant psychological distress or fragmentation, dreams reflect that chaos. You might have nightmares, recurring dreams where you're being chased or trapped, dreams where you can't speak or can't move, dreams of falling, drowning, being lost, dreams that leave you shaken and anxious when you wake up. These aren't random. These are your unconscious mind trying to process overwhelming material. Trauma, conflict, unintegrated experiences, parts of yourself that are in distress. The unconscious is basically screaming, hey, something's wrong down here. Pay attention. But as healing progresses, as you do the work of integration, as you make the unconscious conscious, dreams transform. They don't necessarily become pleasant. The unconscious still has work to do, still presents challenges, still shows you material that needs attention. But the quality changes, the tone shifts. Nightmares become less frequent, or if they do occur, they're less intense. You might have a dream where something scary is happening, but you're not helpless in it. You find your voice. You discover resources. You wake up feeling intrigued rather than terrified. Recurring dreams, those loops your psyche gets stuck in, they might shift. The scenario changes slightly, or they resolve completely. The thing you've been dreaming about for years just stops. Sometimes healing dreams include specific imagery, water which Jung associated with the unconscious itself, journeys which represent psychological movement, encounters with wise figures which might represent aspects of the self trying to communicate with the ego. You might dream of cleaning a house, which symbolizes psychic organization, crossing a bridge, which represents transition, discovering new rooms in a familiar place, which suggests unknown aspects of yourself becoming available to consciousness. These aren't universal symbols with fixed meanings. Jung was clear about that. Dream interpretation is personal. What water means to you might be different from what it means to me. But pay attention to the emotional tone. How do you feel in your dreams? How do you feel when you wake up? Do you feel less haunted, less pursued by unnamed threats? Is there a sense of movement or progress, even in difficult dreams? These shifts indicate that your unconscious mind is settling, finding new equilibrium, integrating previously overwhelming material. Your conscious mind might not register the healing. You might still think you're struggling, but your dreams know. Your unconscious knows. And it's telling you through the imagery of sleep. If your dream life has shifted even subtly, that's evidence. That's your psyche doing its deepest work while you're not consciously watching. Jung spent decades analyzing his own dreams and the dreams of his patients. He understood that the unconscious speaks in symbols and images, in stories that bypass rational thought. And when those stories start to change, when the emotional texture of your dream world transforms, it means something fundamental has shifted in your psychological structure. You're not the same person who had those nightmares 5 years ago. Your psyche has reorganized itself, healed itself, integrated material that was once too overwhelming to process. And it's showing you this truth every night, if you're paying attention. Sign number 6, the shadow as friend. 6th sign, and this might be the most important, you've stopped waging war against yourself. You've accepted your wholeness, light and dark, good and bad, everything. Let me tell you what this looks like in practice. You can admit things about yourself that you used to deny with everything you had. Yes, I can be selfish. Yes, I feel jealous sometimes. Yes, I have aggressive impulses. Yes, I think petty thoughts. Yes, I sometimes wish bad things on people who've hurt me. And when you admit these things, you don't spiral into shame. You don't think, I'm a terrible person. You just think, yeah, that's human. This is what Jung meant by the gold in the shadow. See, the shadow isn't just bad stuff. It's not just the evil parts of yourself you've rejected. It's also energy, vitality, creativity, aspects of yourself that got shoved down there because they didn't fit the persona you were supposed to present. Maybe you were taught to always be nice, so your assertiveness went into the shadow. Maybe you were taught to be serious and responsible, so your playfulness went into the shadow. Maybe you were taught emotions are weak, so your tenderness went into the shadow. All that stuff is still you. It's just been locked in the basement. And when you do shadow work, when you bring these parts back into consciousness, something paradoxical happens. The very qualities you feared become available to you as resources. The anger you suppressed becomes healthy boundary setting. The selfishness you denied becomes appropriate self-care. The aggression you feared becomes the drive to protect what matters. This is integration. This is wholeness. And here's what's beautiful. When you accept all of yourself, when you stop pretending you're only light and goodness, you become less judgmental of everyone else. Because you understand. You get it. You know that every human psyche contains darkness, that we all have impulses we're not proud of, thoughts we'd never say out loud, feelings that contradict our values. And that doesn't make us evil. It makes us human. The people who seem most morally superior, most judgmental of others' flaws, they're the ones still at war with their shadow. They haven't integrated their darkness, so they project it onto everyone else. But you've done the work. You've looked at your shadow and said, okay, this is also me. And in that acceptance, something profound happens. You stop needing to be perfect. You stop maintaining this exhausting facade. You can just be complicated, contradictory, fully human. There's a relief in this that's hard to describe. It's like your entire system exhales. You've been holding yourself so tightly, trying to be good enough, acceptable enough, worthy enough. And now you can just exist. With all your messiness, all your contradictions, all your very human flaws, you're still ethical. You still have values. You still care about being a good person. But it's not about performance anymore. It's not about proving anything. You're good enough as you are, whole enough as you are. If you find yourself able to acknowledge the less flattering parts of yourself without shame, without spiraling, without feeling like you're a bad person, that's massive. That's evidence of deep integration. That's you having made peace with your shadow. And that's one of the clearest signs that you've healed way more than you think. This acceptance doesn't mean acting on every impulse. It doesn't mean abandoning your ethics or hurting people. It means knowing all of who you are, consciousness of the full spectrum of your humanity. And from that consciousness comes choice. real choice. Not the false choice of repression where you pretend certain parts of you don't exist. But the authentic choice that comes from acknowledging everything and then deciding how to act. That's psychological freedom. That's what Jung meant by individuation. Sign number 7. Life has meaning again. 7th and final sign. Life feels meaningful. Now this one's interesting because it's not about what you do. It's about how you experience what you do. Jung distinguished between the ego and the self. The ego is your conscious sense of I, your personality, your identity. The self, capital S, is something bigger. It's the organizing center of your entire psyche. Conscious and unconscious. The totality of who you are. And Jung observed that in the first half of life, we're naturally focused on ego development. We're building identity, establishing career, creating relationships, finding our place in the world. These things matter. They're necessary. But at some point, often around midlife, ego achievements start to feel hollow. You have the career, you have the relationship, you have the house and the car and the status, and you feel empty. This is what Jung called the midlife crisis. But it's not really a crisis. It's an invitation. It's the self calling to you saying, hey, there's more to life than ego gratification. There's meaning beyond accomplishment. Let me show you. When you've engaged with this process, when you've started the journey of real individuation, life begins to feel meaningful again. Even if nothing external has changed. This meaning might come through creativity, a sudden urgency to write, paint, make music, something inside you demanding expression. It might come through service, a desire to contribute to something larger than yourself, to help others, to dedicate yourself to a cause that matters. It might come through spiritual practice, not necessarily religion, though it could be, but some sense of connection to something transcendent, something sacred, or it might just be a deepened appreciation for ordinary moments. The way light falls through a window, the laughter of a child, the changing of seasons, the taste of really good coffee. You become more present, more able to experience beauty, more moved by small things. This is what Jung meant by encountering the numinous. Experiences that touch something beyond the personal ego. Moments of transcendence, connection to mystery. And when you've healed, when you've done the work of integration, you become more permeable to these experiences, less defended, less armored, more open. This doesn't mean life becomes easy. It doesn't mean suffering disappears. Jung was clear about that. Suffering is part of being human, part of being conscious. But suffering itself takes on different meaning. It becomes part of the larger pattern of growth rather than meaningless chaos. You start to see what Jung called synchronicity, meaningful coincidences, moments when the outer world seems to reflect your inner state, when the right book appears at the right time, when you meet the right person just when you need them, when circumstances align in ways that feel more than random. Now, Jung wasn't being mystical about this. He wasn't saying the universe is magical. He was saying that when you're in alignment with your own psyche, when you're paying attention, you notice the meaningful patterns that were always there. You participate in your life rather than just going through the motions. And this sense of meaning, and this feeling of being part of something larger, this is perhaps the deepest sign that healing has occurred. Because you're no longer just surviving. You're no longer just managing symptoms or avoiding pain. You're actually living, engaged, present, connected. Life feels like it's happening with you rather than to you. You're not a passive victim of circumstances. You're an active participant in your own story. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Not becoming perfect, not eliminating suffering, but becoming who you actually are. finding your place in the larger pattern, living with meaning and purpose that comes from within rather than being imposed from outside. If you felt this shift, even in small ways, even inconsistently, that's huge. That's your psyche telling you that you're on the right path, that the work is paying off, that you've healed way more than you think. Many in the field of Carl Rogers and personal development would recognize this as what Rogers called the good life, though Jung approached it from a different philosophical foundation. Both understood that psychological health isn't about reaching a fixed state, but about engaging fully with the ongoing process of becoming. So here we are, 7 signs, 7 markers of healing that happen quietly, subtly beneath conscious awareness. Let's recap what we've covered, because I want you to really feel this. I want you to recognize yourself in these signs. 1, you can be alone without being lonely. You've befriended yourself. 2, your old triggers don't trigger you anymore. The past has lost its teeth. 3, you can hold paradox. You don't need everything to make simple sense. 4, other people's projections don't stick to you. You know who you are. 5, your dreams have shifted. Your unconscious is settling. 6, you've accepted your shadow. You've stopped waging war against yourself. 7, life feels meaningful. You're connected to something larger than ego. Now here's what I want you to understand. These aren't achievements. These aren't goals you pursue. These are byproducts, natural results of the individuation process. You can't force them. You can't make them happen through willpower or discipline or positive thinking. They emerge. They unfold. They appear when you do the real work of looking inward, examining your shadows, integrating what you find. And the crazy thing is, this work often happens without you consciously directing it. Your psyche has its own intelligence, its own drive toward wholeness. Jung called it the teleological nature of the psyche. It's moving toward something, growing toward integration, whether you're paying attention or not. That's why people can heal without realizing it. The work is happening on levels you can't see, in dreams, in small behavioral shifts, in subtle changes in how you relate to yourself and others. Your consciousness is always the last to know. So if you recognized yourself in any of these signs, I want you to pause right now and just acknowledge it. Give yourself credit. Honor how far you've come. Because here's what happens to most people. They heal significantly, they transform in profound ways, but they never recognize it. They keep thinking they're broken. They keep describing themselves as still working on it, or not there yet. Meanwhile, the evidence is everywhere. In their relationships, in their responses, in their capacity to handle life in ways they couldn't before. Don't miss your own transformation. Don't be so focused on the destination that you failed to notice you've been moving the whole time. This framework we've explored today, these 7 signs, they're not just Jung's ideas. They're backed by decades of depth psychology, by studies in personal growth and human development. While Carl Rogers and personal development research approach transformation from different angles, there's remarkable convergence on these core markers of psychological health. So now what? Now that you know these signs, now that you can recognize healing when it's happening, what do you do with this information? First, stop underestimating yourself. Stop dismissing your growth. Stop thinking you haven't come far enough. Look at where you were 5 years ago. Hell, look at where you were last year. Compare that person to who you are now, not in terms of external achievements, in terms of internal capacity, how you handle emotions, how you respond to triggers, how you treat yourself in private moments, how you navigate relationships, how you sit with uncertainty. If anything has shifted, that's growth, that's healing, that counts. Second, trust the process. Trust your psyche's intelligence. You don't need to force this. You don't need to have all the answers right now. The individuation process unfolds in its own time, at its own pace. Your job is to stay conscious, to keep examining your patterns, to notice when you're projecting, to befriend your shadow, to pay attention to your dreams, to question your assumptions. That's it. That's the work. The rest happens naturally. Third, be patient with yourself. Healing isn't linear. You'll have setbacks, days where you feel like you've regressed, moments where the old triggers fire again, times when you can't hold paradox and you need things to be simple. That's normal. That's human. It doesn't mean you've failed. It doesn't mean the healing isn't real. It just means you're still human, still in process, still becoming. Fourth, share this understanding. One of the most powerful things you can do is help others recognize their own healing. When you see someone beating themselves up for not being healed enough, point out their growth. Help them see how far they've come. This isn't just kindness. It's how we create a culture that actually understands healing, that recognizes transformation, that honors the quiet, subtle work of becoming whole. And fifth, keep going. Because here's the truth. Jung understood individuation never ends. There's no point where you're done. No moment where you've achieved complete wholeness and can stop growing. You're always in process, always discovering new layers, always integrating new material. That's not a problem. That's the nature of being conscious. The goal isn't to finish. The goal is to engage, to stay curious, to keep exploring the depths of your own psyche, to live as Jung wrote, the examined life, the conscious life, the individuated life. So here's my invitation to you as we close this out. Take a moment right now and consider which of these signs you've experienced. Maybe it's just one. Maybe it's all seven. Maybe it's something adjacent to these, but not quite captured by my words. Whatever it is, acknowledge it. Recognize it. Let it sink in that you've been healing this whole time, that your psyche has been doing its work even when your mind thought you were still broken. You're not as damaged as you think. You're not as far from wholeness as you believe. You're not as stuck as it sometimes feels. You're growing, transforming, becoming. And if you take nothing else from this video, take this: the journey. Jung described this process of individuation. It's not about becoming someone else. It's not about achieving some idealized version of yourself. It's about becoming more fully who you actually are, with all your light and all your darkness, all your contradictions, all your very human complexity. That's what healing looks like. Not perfection, not the elimination of all pain, but wholeness, integration, the courage to be completely, authentically yourself. And if you're on that path, if you're doing that work, if you can see even the smallest evidence of these signs in your life, then you're already further along than you think. You've healed more than you realize. And that's worth celebrating. I want to hear from you. Because this isn't just about me sharing Jung's ideas. This is about you recognizing your own journey. So here's what I want you to do. Down in the comments, tell me which of these 7 signs resonated most with you. Which one made you pause and think, oh shit, that's me. That's actually happening. Was it the comfort with solitude, the loss of old triggers, the ability to hold paradox? Tell me your story. Because when you share your experience, 2 things happen. 1, you cement your own recognition of your healing. You make it conscious. You give yourself credit. And 2, you help someone else who's reading the comments realize they're not alone. That this is real. That healing is possible. That they've been transforming too. We need to talk about this stuff more. We need to recognize psychological growth when it's happening. We need to stop waiting for dramatic transformations and start noticing the quiet ones. So share your story. Tell me where you've healed without realizing it. What sign showed up in your life that you'd been dismissing or minimizing. And if you found this valuable, if this changed how you see yourself, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Because this is the kind of content I create. Deep dives into psychology, philosophy, human transformation. The stuff that actually matters. Not surface-level self-help. Not quick fixes or life hacks. Real exploration of what it means to be human. What it takes to become whole. Jungian depth psychology combined with modern understanding of how people actually change. This is about building a community of people who are doing the real work, who aren't satisfied with easy answers, who want to understand themselves at the deepest levels. If that's you, you're in the right place. Subscribe. Turn on notifications. Come along on this journey, because we're just getting started. There's so much more to explore, so many more insights to uncover. So many more ways to recognize the transformation that's already happening in your life. Your healing is real. Your growth matters. And you're exactly where you need to be. Now go live that truth.